I'm Becher Townshend and welcome to Foncast, Tasmania's top-rating political podcast. Well, the federal election has been run and won, and it's fair to say the Liberals' goose has been cooked, their turkeys trussed, their chicken well and truly stuffed. Joining me in what promises to be a lively episode to examine the election entrails are Alex AJ Johnston.
I would not have missed this for the world.
There you go. Jack Milroy.
Great to be back.
And of course my business partner and long-suffering Liberal
Apparatchik.
Brad Stansfield.
Hello, Beach. Hello, everyone. And I've got my special red tie today.
There you go. Yes.
Welcome to the revolution,
Can't beat them, join them.
Yes,
That's right.
Yes. Joining us in the glorious socialist utopia today is Brad Stansfield. Brad, let's cut to the chase. You were helping the Liberals out locally on the election campaign. What went wrong?
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Everything.
It was, without doubt, and I don't think I'm Robinson Crusoe in saying this, the worst coalition election campaign in living memory. And when I say living memory, I mean Peter Ray's living memory. I saw him on the weekend, former senator, and he was talking about it being the worst campaign he could remember since the 1950s.
World War II.
Yes, a long time.
That's a long time ago.
Wow.
I did a count. I've been involved in about 12 elections in a campaign capacity at state or federal level over the last 15 years or so. And yeah, nothing comes close. Well, Malcolm sort of comes close. 2016 was a pretty ordinary campaign. If anyone remembers that, haven't wiped it from their memory. The 8-week slog through the middle of winter. But the Liberals actually won that one, so I don't think we can cross that out. They broke every rule in the campaign.
All of your rules.
All of the rules. They broke all of my number
You've
one
got
rules.
25 and they managed to break them all.
On the stone tablet.
I wonder how they found time.
Probably more than that. Well, they broke some of them twice, I reckon, or even 3 times. It was extraordinary. What I would say, Beach, is that campaigns matter. Every election is winnable, and campaigns really, really matter. Campaigns are seen by the voters as a proxy of how you'd govern.
Yep.
So if you run a good particularly from the opposition, if you run a good campaign from opposition, they say, oh, these guys look reasonably competent, probably trust them with the keys to the lodge. But if you run a crap campaign, they just go, can't run a campaign, can't run the country. Yep. And that's very clearly what happened here, I think. No consistent message, no decent policies.
Any policies, Brad?
Not many.
No, hard to find.
No coherent narrative.
Yep.
No listening to the local advice. And there's been others that have said that.
Yeah.
They didn't listen to you.
I know. And look what happened.
No, I'm asking a question. I mean, you've just said you've got 12 elections under your belt, but they didn't come to you for wisdom.
Look, every election, when you're running, or helping to run a state version of a national campaign, the national campaign always takes control.
They're in charge.
They're in charge to varying degrees. And every election there's always complaints about head office, and I'm sure it's the same in Labor Party. Yep. Pushing back on this, pushing back on that, not doing this, not doing that. But
well, what's an example?
This was the worst. I'm glad you asked. So, practical example. So, Peter Dutton's visit to Tasmania, second visit, I think, of the campaign, about a week before polling day. We suggested, they said, we're coming to Tassie, what do you want to do? I said, okay, well, how about come down, visit a farm in the south of the state, in Southern Lions, talk about the Southeast Irrigation Promise and announce, because it was in the can, to be announced, that you're going to commit to 50% federal funding for future irrigation projects moving forward. Good, strong announcement into the narrative, into the jobs base where we want to be in Lions. No, we're going to do a domestic violence announcement. Okay, in Hobart.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, there's obviously nothing wrong with the announcement.
Nothing wrong with the announcement.
But
why would you come to Tasmania to make a domestic violence
Or why
announcement?
wouldn't you do it in Bass?
And why would you do it in Clark? Yeah, that's exactly right.
Exactly. And so then they came down, they did that. What I gather that the press conference was sort of the day that the press pack really turned on him, and it was a pretty messy press conference that day in Clark. Then he decided just sort of do a appease. They'd still do a farm visit. So they went out to a winery, which we had advised against.
In a full suit, was that
one? In a full suit, and drank a couple glasses of Pinot Noir. Very nice, I'm sure. at a winery. No messaging about jobs or irrigation or anything because they'd done the domestic violence job earlier in the day. So all we got was him drinking wine. You know, just that sort of basic stuff that just doesn't work. Didn't work.
Yeah, yeah.
And let's not even talk about the time they went to AgFest to play in a sandpit with some kiddies' trucks. I mean,
But AgFest would normally be a good place to be seen.
it would be a great place to be seen.
yeah.
You know, there's lots of big trucks and big tractors and farmers, but no, we sat in a
Sandpit.
sandpit and played with some kids and some toy Tonka trucks. Like,
Was it all over well and truly before then, though?
yeah, no, it was. Yeah, I mean, that was.
But there are examples of
That's examples
things that
of,
have happened for
of
a
things
while.
that just, you know, real practical things that could
I
have been
think-
done a hell of a lot better.
I think the example that you were mentioning earlier to me before we became on air, which is here, was really the response to the budget was the bit that got me. I've got to say, early in the piece, I was when Dutton opposed those tax cuts, it was like, what? What,
No,
what
I think
what are you doing? I
we
mean,
discussed
that's
it here, didn't we?
Yeah, yeah,
It
we
was
did.
it was
just like, and I thought, well, there must be something smart here, and unfortunately, you know, I don't have the wisdom or the experience to know it. But unfortunately, I'm still waiting for it.
It was just the hubris of that moment.
Well,
They
yeah,
thought
well,
they were
it's
going to
just-
cruise in.
Yeah, just mad, just absolute madness. And from Labor, it was a masterstroke, $1,000 for everybody. It's great stuff.
And I want to hear much, much more from Brad, but Jack and I were saying off air, it was a blessing in disguise in the end that Labor had to hand down a budget, because I think from then they had the momentum.
Yep.
You know, the cyclone forced their hand, and at the time it seemed like it sort of upset their plans.
Yeah.
But handing down a budget, and Jim Chalmers has been a pretty impressive performer all the way through, it sort of reminded people that they were in charge, that they'd had a pretty flawless campaign in terms of drama. Like Anthony Albanese, a lot of people said was underwhelming and maybe wasn't the Prime Minister that some sort of true believers hoped for early on. Well, I think that might have been a virtue in the end, because he was seen as Mr. Reliable, Mr.
Steady.
Predictable.
Steady. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the national campaign reflected that. It was a steady campaign. There weren't any mistakes. We were saying earlier, there's been no scandals in the first term. And that kind of, you know, workmanlike, competent approach by the Prime Minister was reflected in the campaign. It wasn't a campaign that set people's hearts afire to the extent that we're now seeing, you know, something like 88 seats. This is why anyone who tells you they predicted this is full of shit. You know, it was a surprise, a very pleasant one for me, but it was a surprise. You know, and I think that the cyclone that kind of didn't end up being a cyclone.
Yeah.
And it was meant to be called Anthony.
And it was meant to be called Anthony. We ended up getting Cyclone Anthony, but it was just a couple of months later, and it was at the polls.
I must admit, I was watching Labor run into the election process, you know, and when the cyclone came along, I thought, oh, they're going to lose all the momentum. The Liberals are, you know, Dutton's finally starting to look like he's got something together. Cyclone came along, and then I thought, oh no, they'll lose it, but they didn't. They actually managed to maintain it. Then they went into the budget, and then they went through the process, and they just ran it right through. It was quite.
And the other thing that happened around that time was everything changing in the US. You know, the Liberation Day, the Tariff Day, the Trump administration's kind of descent into the fever swamp of kind of grievance and retribution.
Yeah.
And I think that voters, we saw this happen in Canada in the federal election. I think it happened here. Voters just sat up for a minute and said, wait, hang on, is this the direction we want to go?
Yeah.
And that's not to suggest that Peter Dutton is anything on that level, but directionally, the Liberal Party had spent, you know, a couple of years, starting with the Voice campaign, you know, tending that way, signaling an alignment with that style of politics, and I think they were too slow to realise they needed to pivot away from that.
And they were picking up some of those policies and just sort of picking the eyes out of it and leaving them out there, which I think was quite an issue.
Some people around the periphery of the campaign were sort of leaning into the Trump stuff, you know, quite proudly.
Yeah, that's right.
So, yeah, I agree with you. Dutton wasn't exactly mimicking Trump, but if there was a Trump side of the election, it was certainly a coalition.
Perhaps at one stage there he's dog whistling to Trump once or twice, if that makes sense, just to pick up those votes. The one thing, though, that absolutely fascinates me out of this election is, you're right, Jack, nobody picked it up as far as I can see. But also, most importantly, there was no sense of baseball bats for Dutton or anything like that. It wasn't a I hate this guy, I've got to vote him out. It was just no, I'm not going there. It was a lot more subtle, I think.
Yeah, I think some of the harsh, blunt political stereotypes around Dutton didn't help, and Labor did a decent job of, reminding people of those. That Malcolm Turnbull clip that comes up all the time where he called him a thug or something like that. Look, people who follow politics, and I've seen a lot of, and obviously Dutton's concession speech was very good. It's ironic in a way they've tried to soften his image so many times, and the one time it works is when it's too late.
Yeah. And he's got everybody's attention.
Unfortunately for Dutton, a lot of people have such a cursory interest in politics, and when the only things they've ever heard associated with his name have been sort of blunt, negative stereotypes, it's pretty hard to overcome. And that's why I think, despite how much momentum he had as opposition leader, and at one stage looked like he was on his way to victory, when he first became opposition leader, the reaction was, could you elect Peter Dutton? And that sort of disappeared for a while because he did do well, and he did very well on The Voice, obviously. But I think those problems came back to haunt the Liberals later. Do you agree with any of that, Brad?
Well, the single biggest reason we lost was Peter Dutton.
And why is that?
No doubt about that. Well, I think some of the Trump stuff that you've mentioned, but I think particularly in Tasmania, the coupling of Dutton with the nuclear policy was very, very effective. And what it did was it portrayed Dutton as being anti-Tasmanian. And if you're anti-Tasmanian, we aren't going to vote for you. And the last time that happened was Malcolm Turnbull in 2016 when he was anti-Tasmanian because of his innovation agenda, which cost the Libs Bass, Brad and Lions. And then the time before that, someone was anti-Tasmanian, was Abbott in 2010 when he was going to rip the NBN out of the ground and start again, if people are old enough to remember that. And we lost all the seats in Tasmania then as well. So if you were able to characterise your opponent's leader as being anti-Tasmanian, you are basically stuffed in Tasmania, and that's what happened here. Absolutely happened here.
And I think from my point of view too, Dutton was tagged with an image a long time ago when he was Immigration Minister or Home Affairs Minister, and he has no range. He has no range. He's basically the same in every conversation, every interview. He's got no source. He's got no riz. There's no he doesn't have anything to keep you interested or keep you watching. And I think what that means is when he does need to execute a pivot, when he needed to move away from the Trump-style politics, he may have actually done it, but no one could tell because, most media is consumed on a phone, on a scroll, on mute, and he looks the same in absolutely everything. He wears the same clothes. His expressions are the same. He's not emoting. He's not connecting on any level other than, I am the Peter Dutton that you have known. So if you do want to change your image, you actually kind of have to change your image.
Yeah, well, I mean, I very much saw him as a former policeman from Queensland. And, as a Tasmanian, how much do I relate to a former policeman from Queensland? Not a lot. I was surprised about how little I could relate to the man compared to other leaders over the years that, sort of got to know a bit more. They seem to warm a bit more to Tasmania. So it is an interesting thing, and credit to Labor, they absolutely maximised the anti-Dutton sentiment.
Brad's right. A nuclear power plant, even though I know he wasn't even ever contemplating building one here, but imagine if they did, how many petition signatures you'd get against a nuclear power plant in Tasmania.
Imagine trying to get it through planning.
Well, hold on. Would it be more controversial than the stadium or the Spirits?
Let's not find out.
No, it depends where you put it, doesn't it?
But I mean, that was, if Dutton had a signature policy, that was it.
Yeah.
And it's
un-Tasmanian.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem.
Yeah. Have they lost that halo, the coalition, Brad, that always helped them, that they were the best economic managers? It seems to have disappeared, and I don't really know why, but it seems to have evaporated. This election must prove that. Because
I think it disappeared during COVID when they spent money like it was going out of fashion, and then didn't straighten it up afterwards. That I think that was the start of the downward slide.
Yeah, but
that affected all governments, to be fair, across the nation, across the world. But that's when that, I think, was lost.
Well, and also compare Taylor to Chalmers. You know,
God.
there's I mean, it's chalk and
My
cheese.
mum is in love with Jim Chalmers.
Well,
Very effective.
you know,
her,
and,
no, but
and-
this is sort of a half serious point. Her and all the sort of older baby boomer Labor friends just adore Jim Chalmers.
Yeah, well-
you know, sort of, like real adoration.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, when the whole Trump sort of stuff blew up, you know, I've got to stop campaigning and have urgent briefings, you know, with senior Treasury officials. You and the media can all come. You know, Reid, you know, he's playing it like a fiddle, but he did play it very well. He did play it as a very loyal, to IC to Albo. You know, he did very well, and that's the thing that you can see the strength in the Labor team and across their front bench in terms of the members that come forward. Watt as well was a great communicator on behalf of them, you know, and they've just got a few key figures, Penny Wong, you know, who come forward and really, you know, just broaden the voice of the PM, and so make them look like a cohesive team. I've always argued they've had, you know, because some of these people have been around since, you know, pretty well Gillard Rudd, but they've got this sort of credibility. They've been in those roles for quite a long time. They're well known.
I might have said this before, but Mark Butler, it might have not even been in the official campaign, but it was a sign that they had grown up a little bit politically. He did half an hour of radio with Leon Compton, didn't mention Dutton once, just answered people's questions about health. And I went, goodness me, they are so disciplined at the moment. That was a good sign.
All right. Well, let's you know, never far from the rough and tumble of state politics. What about state issues? What do we think, Brad? What's your thoughts about those kind of things?
I think they were very much at the margin. I know Alex is going to ask about the stadium. I mean, look, the stadium was the elephant in the middle of the room. Like it was everyone knew about it. It was coming up in conversations. Voters were talking about it. But Labor and the Liberals nominally had the same position. And Jackie Hu, was nowhere to be seen campaigning against it. So it largely stayed out of the conversation.
Where was, I'm sort of jumping about a bit here, where was Lambie? What was she doing?
I don't know. Interstate.
I would not have known she was actually up at this election if there wasn't a billboard on Main Road and Newtown Road.
The irony is Tammy Tyrrell, you know, was out there campaigning, definitely at the start of the campaign. Anyhow, I distract Brett. Go on.
Yeah, so look, I don't think it played much of a role. I mean, obviously Labor will try and beat it up. That's their job. I didn't hear any talk about, you know, non-existent berths for ships in northwest Tasmania or anything like that. No real talk about any of that stuff. It was all dominated by the national conversation. That being said, if I were Labor, I would be a little bit excited by the fact that we found some more Labor voters. They do exist in Tasmania.
They very much
now we've
do.
just got to find a way to harness them.
All right.
So you say the stadium wasn't an issue, but yesterday the Mercury broke the story that at least at some stage it was put on the agenda as potential policy switch. How seriously was that contemplated?
Well, what happens at Bandcamp stays at Bandcamp, Alex.
How did you get the state rep to not attend that meeting?
No, I mean,
long
but
and muted
we're
silence.
fascinated. I mean, this is why I got out of bed early this morning. I need more than that, Brad. Like, could have it worked? And how would you do it?
No, I don't think it would have worked because, as I've outlined, I don't really think it was. People were not thinking about it in a voting sense. They knew it was there, but there was no vote. You know, this election is a vote about the state. Now, if it had been done at the start of the campaign, perhaps, and I recall a campaign, was it 2019 when the Liberals ran a campaign about health, not football, when Shorten promised 25 million to the AFL team in Hobart and 50 million to Mona, and Liberals said we'll put into health. Yeah. So, but that was at the start of the campaign. In fact, very early in the campaign, to do something like that, if indeed it was contemplated, late in the campaign, I don't think would have any effect whatsoever. It could even backfire.
Smacks of desperation.
Also, a small state, that it's extremely difficult for any party to have a different position federally than they have. It's the same 9 people or whatever that work in these parties, and it goes federal to state, and that, you know, seeing the salmon issue in the Labor Party, like, it's not easy, and something as totemic as a stadium, I don't see how that would have worked.
I was told it was coming up on the doors a lot, whether it influenced votes. You know, I think the leaders were a bigger factor than state issues, but It's certainly the hottest
But
The problem
water
was,
cooler.
if you're against the stadium, who would you vote for?
Yeah.
There was actually no real anti-stadium candidates running.
Yeah.
Other than Wilkie and Clark, and
Other
he
than
did well again. So.
Well, and it was a lane for Lambie, but she didn't really take
But she
it.
was no there. She could have
wasn't
probably
there.
got a Senate seat assured if she had to have actually turned up and done that.
All right. Well, before we do around the grounds of the seats, tell us about the polling. Senator John O'Duniam has been telling everyone that you had your own polling that showed you were going to lose.
Did you all read my facial expression the last
Yeah.
pod? We were a week out.
Yep.
Yeah, look, I had no doubt that we were in a very bad position a few weeks out. Now, I was astounded and remain astounded that very senior coalition people at a federal level thought right up until the close of the bell, ringing of the bell, 6 p.m. Saturday, that they were going to win. Because there was just no actual evidence of that being the fact. But there was some sort of group think that, I don't know what it is, it's like a Salamanca bubble on steroids, that something different was going to happen. And look, we all know the internal polling was wrong. I mean, everyone, that's been well canvassed.
Yep.
It was badly wrong. And I've been around long enough to know you never ignore the polls. The polls are never wrong. Perhaps the problem is they were wrong in 2019, so that's sort of given people this thing that they're
Wrong
wrong
time.
wrong.
Yeah.
They're going to be wrong again, but they're never wrong. And when your pollster saying one thing and 5 others are saying something different, chances are probably it's your pollster, not the other 5, that are the issue.
And is that because your pollster is sort of softening the bad news? Or?
There is a danger of internal pollsters doing that, because they don't want to depress people. And they sometimes they do soften or spin the information. They won't talk about the primary vote. But tell you what, Jack, your net faves are on the way up. Oh, great, you're going well. That's the sort of thing that they do. But as soon as they start doing that, to me, that raises alarm bells because you've got a problem. Now, the Tasmania division did do some internal polling here from our good friends, show sponsor EMRS. There's a reason that 10 days out, basically, the Tasmanian division significantly reallocated resources out of Lions into Bass and Braddon. But it was too late by that point. Too late. I mean, I was of the view, and I wouldn't say it publicly, but happy to say it now, is that Lions was never winnable for the coalition the moment that they switched candidates to Rebecca. And again, that was supported by our good friends at EMRS and what they found.
Yep.
But nationally, there was an imaginary world where Lions was winnable. Now, and the problem with those things is if you have that sort of wrong information, you put your resources in the wrong spot, you put your tactics and your strategy in the wrong spot, and it all ends up going.
The irony is, they didn't put any tactics into the wrong spot, did they? In terms of what you're talking about with Dartman, with the visit, in terms of
true.
So if you have your time again, you just focus on Bass and Braddon and go hard.
Or sandbag.
The 3 seats tend to move together. Almost inevitably, they tend to move together. And so, if you run a strong campaign in Bass and Braddon, historically, what that'll do is sort of drag Lions along for the ride anyway.
Yep.
Problem is, this time Lions has got a star candidate on the other side. You're just wasting your time and money.
All right.
That's effectively where we ended up.
Well, let's do it. Let's do around the grounds. Lions, we've sort of talked about a bit. Gents, do you have any other input, Jack?
No, I mean, I think, I'm not going to try to go back to our scorecards because I don't think they look great. But I do think we all picked Wilkie. I think we all picked Wilkie. And I think we all picked Rebecca to win in Lions. I mean, I certainly didn't expect it to be, or any of the margins to be what they were. But like Brad says, that's not surprising, and she'll be there for a good long time, I would think.
Yeah.
Brad, you ultra critical of Rebecca White as an opposition leader, but did you see a change as she campaigned federally?
Well, I think I made the point very early on that, perhaps even before she was pre-selected, that she was campaigning harder for the federal seat of Lions than she ever appeared to campaign for the Premiership of Tasmania. That was, in terms of on-the-ground activity, she was working very, very hard, particularly in the north where she was less well known, and it paid off.
Yeah.
Now, Susie, nothing against Susie, hard-working candidate for 4 years on the ground, but you can't control what the other side does, and when they threw up that candidate change.
And did that knock the stuffing out of the campaign when they changed to Rebecca White? Like, it seemed from my position that it might have just, zapped the confidence.
I think it certainly changed the overall dynamics. I don't know how Susie felt about it, but obviously it's a big change when you're going from,
Brian Mitchell,
unpopular
to
Brian Mitchell to...
I'm not saying he's unpopular.
Well, I think as evidenced by the last election, he nearly lost, don't forget. To all of a sudden Rebecca, then it does change things. But again, where it ended up is where, we knew it to be 6 months ago.
All right, so Braddon, what do we think there? I mean, I've got a few comments to make, and I suppose I found myself. We work with West Coast Council, and I caught up with Shane Pitt on the Friday, and we were chatting about the election campaign, and he said, "Is Anne going to win, Beach?" And I said, "Look, Shane, I don't think she will. I think Hingston's got it," and you could see his face fall at the time, and I said, "Oh, why are you sort of so down at face?" He said, "Well, Hingston hasn't been near here. Like, it was quite palpable in his anger." And he said, and Anne has worked very hard. And I've got to say, she did work very hard through that salmon issue. And I've always had a bit of a view about politicians, and that is, don't worry too much about their politics, worry about what they do for their constituency and their people. And there's no doubt that Anne, on that salmon issue, worked very hard. And so, she won. A 15% swing that's a huge number. I mean, and Braddon has always done this over the years, and sort of picking up on what Brad's saying, if they don't think you're any good, or they don't think your leader's any good, you're gone in Braddon. But if they think you're good, well, you're in. And that's where Anne got.
Everything's easy after the fact, but I want to make a couple of points. I didn't predict Braddon. I thought if the swing was on, it might get close, but I just thought the Liberals had to win based on the fact that for so many consecutive elections, both state and federal, they've given Labor a touch-up. So I was very surprised. So please don't think I'm reinventing history here. But in hindsight, everything makes a bit more sense. When the Liberals pre-selected Mal Hingston, I hadn't heard of him before, right? And I know that sounds silly. I live in Hobart, but I grew up on the northwest coast, and I've still got reason.
Like Dean Winter here.
No, I was born in Devonport. I will never.
Is that a fact? Can we see your birth certificate?
Yeah, I'll show you the old maternity hospital. Yep. Anyway, and I thought, that's curious, because I was, obviously reasonably well engaged, know a lot of people on the northwest coast. But I thought, maybe someone like Adam Brooks, who's been there a short time and really developed a big reputation.
Yep.
Peter Freshney, the mayor of Latrobe, was on Leon the other day, and he told a similar story. He said, someone texted me for Mal Hingston's number. I said, I'm sorry, I don't know who he is.
Yeah.
So there's a tough starting point.
Well,
because Northwest is like, if you know the name, that's a huge help. And so in hindsight, maybe the Liberals needed to pick someone with a more established Northwest profile. And then the flip side worked for Anne Urquhart, because when the swing's on, what do you need?
Yeah.
A dependable, known, safe set of hands. And I think that really helped. And a massive departure, obviously, from the risk they took the previous time with I can't even remember his name now, I'm sorry.
Chris Lynch, I think
Chris Lynch, that's right.
But,
who I thought was unfairly maligned for a mistake he'd made decades earlier, but it still wasn't a safe choice in terms of a federal seat.
Two other points to pick up that, and sorry to intrude, but Anne is sort of from more the central part of Northwest Coast, and she's from the Northwest Coasts, so they know her. She's been around for a long time. My first observation when Mal was pre-selected, and I met Mal during the campaign, and he's a nice bloke. I can see how he would have made a great member of Parliament. But he's from the wrong end of the coast. That's the other issue. He's right from Latrobe, so he's right down the wrong end. And this is Braddon. You've got to be well known up Wynyard Way. You've got to get up to Smithton. You've got to get down to Strawn and those kind of things. And they were all working against him as well.
Yeah, I mean, Braddon is a hard place for major parties to run a campaign. Party membership, I would imagine the Liberal Party has probably declined there over the years. I mean, party memberships have declined everywhere. It's a hard place to staff booths. It's a hard place to get people out door knocking. My understanding, and Brad, maybe you have some insight on this, but was that there wasn't a particularly strong Liberal presence on the ground for Malhingston in Braddon. Maybe some booths not covered, maybe not a whole ton of door knocking being done. I think Anne has a loyal kind of base of party members up there that were able to do that. And that's not to say that the field campaign in Braddon was anything like what we saw in Lyons, which was just like a full court press from the Labor team. But certainly I heard that the on the ground efforts there from the Liberals were not probably what you would need or what you might expect in a held seat.
Yeah, a couple things. I think the on-ground presence was okay. I do wonder where the former member was in terms of helping out his successor. Let me know if anyone saw him.
Yeah.
Brad sounds a little pissed off.
Very good.
Sorry.
Like stand up.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I would also say, and I agree with you, Beach. There was, I think, and to a lesser extent as well in Bass, if you like, a repressed swing. Like at the last election, the Libs won Braddon and Bass against the national swing and arguably shouldn't have done so. So there was sort of a catch-up swing that was there waiting to be unleashed. And I think
it didn't show up in the state election, though.
No, but this is the federal election, and I think that explains the size of the swing in both those seats. Not the fact that they swung, but how large those numbers were. But two other factors. The salmon issue, as you identified, Beach, actually Labor turned that to their advantage in Braddon through Anne Urquhart's own hard work.
Yes.
She personally turned that around and made that an equity of her campaign, which is extraordinary. You know, how she won the Straw Booth and Malhingston didn't tells you everything about that campaign and that issue.
And win the West and you win the rest.
That's exactly right. And then the last thing is nuclear, I think, was very, very damaging up there. Marinus coming into the northwest coast, Robbins Island, and Mal, bless his heart, is an engineer, as he told us, was very keen to talk about and defend the coalition's nuclear policy at every opportunity. And I'm not sure, in fact I know, that didn't play to where people wanted him to be talking about, because it was, again, an anti-Tasmanian policy. So I think to an extent he was seen as being, you know, what's the old thing, you know?
A toady to the national leader, not reflecting the local constituency.
Correct.
Whereas Anne's out there fighting for salmon, saying that's a stupid idea. We don't like nuclear, that kind of stuff. So would have played so well, particularly in Braddon. Right, moving on to Bass. What do we think?
Well, I didn't pick this because I thought, as Brad said before, you know, when the swing's on, the swing's on. But I thought Bridget Archer's popular vote was just going to hold the tide against that. But in the end, it doesn't seem to have counted for much, unfortunately, for Bridget.
Well, it seems like, you know, we maybe chatted about this off air, Beach. Bridget Archer did extremely well when she was a maverick, backbench MP. And that was under Scott Morrison. And under Peter Dutton, you know, somewhat ironically, you know, she didn't do that anymore. And, you know, I appreciate when you're in opposition, it's, you know, it's different and it's harder to do that. It's also harder to get attention, which is something which she was very good at in the previous term. But I think that Bridget kind of got caught between being a loyalist and a maverick and not getting the benefits of being either anymore. And I also think, you know, Jess Teasdale was a really good candidate, the type of Labor candidate we need to see more of down here. First time running, you know, had a job doing something else, networking the community, worked really hard. Also shout out to Ross Hart, former Labor MP up there, who I know worked very hard on Jess's campaign to get her elected. So it was good to see everyone come together around Bass.
Well, and Michelle did. Michelle O'Byrne
Absolutely,
did
and Michelle as well.
So,
Michelle and Ross.
So that's a good point. But I suppose for me, I mean, I think Bridget I was reminded, unfortunately, again, I'm showing my age, but of Tony Rundle many years ago when he had the directions, and when he had the directions campaign, and he went to some press conference on the northwest coast, and he turns up, and all his mates are lined up outside the venue that he's going to, holding placards saying he's an arsehole, and they're all sort of tilting the placards, going, "Oh, sorry, Tony, you know, like you're a mate, but your policy sucks," you know, and wave the placard. And I think what Bridget had was, look, Bridget, we all like you, but your leader's, he's a dud, so we're not voting for you. And so she sort of got this apologetic kind of thought, and I think the thought was, and definitely my thought was, they might not like Dutton, but Bridget seems to have got a good temper of bass, seems to have done well. But look, fair play to Jess. She's done exceedingly well.
And when the swing is on and the tide comes in like that, the little things around candidates and campaigns, as much as they're important, they tend to matter less when there's a big swing on, right? And there's just a kind of momentum that happens.
As Brad put it to me at one stage, when the tide goes out, it drags everything out with it.
And I think Labor tapped into the right tone. They were sort of apologetically saying, sorry, but if you vote for Bridget Archie, you get Peter Dutton. They weren't out to vilify her, so then they didn't sort of give her a platform to remind people, who she was. So they did that well, and they ran the negative well, obviously the anti-Dutton stuff, but at the same time had a positive, fresh candidate. I think, everything's easy in hindsight, but in hindsight, I think that helped.
Right. Franklin, here you go. So here are good friends at EMRS. Were right on the mark, accurately predicted both Labor and Liberal primaries. We've now got Brendan Blomley currently sitting on 5% of the vote. I think.
So he gets his deposit back?
Yeah, gets his deposit back. I think that's 1% more than I thought he was going to get at 3,432 votes, just ahead of the One Nation candidate at 4.82%. What else do we make of Franklin? There it is.
It's hard to say who was right out of me and you, wasn't it, Brad?
Well, I think
both wrong or both right? I'm not sure.
I think I said it would be interesting, but she would get home, and I think I stand accurate in that prediction. It was interesting, but she got home. I mean, he ended up getting, combined with the Green vote, around about 30%, which is where I thought he would end up. He needed to get, obviously, to the mid-30s, I think, and a combined vote to give it a shake. It's rubbish running around yesterday with him trying to claim that the first booth of preferences showed he was going to win. Was it
Alana or something?
Yeah, which is just ridiculous. I'm
surprised the ABC let that sort of hang around for as long as, because a lot of people, good-hearted people, took that as gospel, as you would. You think it's closed right back up, and Kevin Bonham was very quick to pour cold water on that. But
he was very explicit about his views on
I
the
think
ABCs.
I think he's gone off the ABC a little bit after that story recently. But I found that surprising that it was even able to sort of get around, because you've got to have trust in those results. I thought Peter George's vote was very strong, higher than I thought. Not a lot, but Johnston probably was closer than I thought it would be, so I'm happy to eat a little bit of humble pie there, but I think it's still a comfortable win for Julie Collins, and her vote stayed pretty solid. So what that said to me is that it was at the Liberals' expense, and obviously they didn't run the strongest campaign in Franklin, but a few anti-salmon Labor people would have gone to Peter George, but then they got it back the other way for people who were looking for the predictable outcome.
Yeah,
Liberal people would have gone to Julie Collins. Fair to say?
I think there's obviously a realignment under the former Liberal vote there. I think the thing that will be interesting to watch is the next state election and whether Peter George runs as a candidate in the state election. I think he'd probably have a fairly good shot at a quota there. Yep. So that will be interesting to see.
He's definitely got the profile, hasn't he?
It shows that salmon is a problem in Franklin. And maybe just Franklin. I mean, there wasn't a Peter George in every electorate, but what do you think, Beach? It's a problem, full stop?
No, I think it's the opposite. I think this election result showed that the community strongly supports salmon. And that's what I see it as, a glowing endorsement of salmon.
But in Franklin, as Jack said,
this is a one-hit wonder going for a particular group in the community, going for the Green vote. I'm sorry, but Julie's victory shows, right, that the broad mainstream of the community want to see the salmon industry continue to thrive and grow. Obviously, they want it to be properly managed in Tasmania, but that's what the vote says to me. It doesn't say anything else.
Yeah, I don't think either of us are saying that there's a majority against salmon farming in Tasmania, but I think it's about the opposition to salmon is getting is getting better at translating the small opposition there is into potential political power. So you saw Garland in the Northwest, and if someone were to elect Peter George in Franklin next state election, it's a sharpening of the divide.
There's no doubt this is the environment movement moving from the timber industry, which they've just about killed, to the salmon industry, right? And the next thing is, once we've done this, we'll have the tourism industry being the root of all evil from the environmental movement. I mean, this is just the process
I don't know
we're
about
going to
that,
go
but
through. Well, you know, that's my view, but I can see
it
what
could be
it's
argued, Becher, that some of the decisions of the environmental movement and pressure over the years have greatly helped our tourism industry.
Well, that's what the environment movement would have you believe, and they stand there and they say, "Oh, don't do this," and you know they said that about plantation forestry. They said, "Oh no, let's get out of old growth and get into plantation." I mean, this is a process and a shift that's going to occur over time. Anyhow,
Okay.
Back to the election.
Anyway,
move on.
take all your points, lest I be accused of ageism again. My understanding is Mr. George is 72. So I think that does the logic of him switching straight to the state election, whatever that, unless it's next week, which I suppose is possible.
It could be.
I'm not sure whether that was his one shot in the locker. We'll see.
Yes, but he could easily hand the baton on
Yeah.
to someone else in that movement. I mean, he's not the only one, and he could endorse them, and Wilkie can endorse,
Yes.
I
It was
don't
the
think-
political. It was the vehicle. It wasn't about him.
He's
personally.
created a dynasty already.
No,
He's
I'm
never
not
been
saying
elected,
that.
AJ.
I'm not saying that.
You
but I'm-
are. You're saying
We're
hand the
talking
baton
about
on.
it from
Oh,
a...
come on.
It means that climate
hang
change
on.
money
there
will
you
go
go.
somewhere.
This is my
Yeah.
point. This is just the environment movement maximising and mobilising issues for their
Yes.
own political
Yeah, it
gain.
is.
That's the reality.
We're not
We're
disagreeing.
not disagreeing with that, but what I'm saying is he just got 23% of the primary vote. The mayor of Clarence got 5%. So you can't say, he didn't make a dent in the electorate. Brad was saying he might have been a chance a week before Beach. And now we're saying, well, next time round in Franklin, there will definitely be someone who will mimic that campaign, whether it's Peter George or one of his close allies.
Or the Greens.
There's room for... I think there's room for both.
There's
because
room for both. Oh
well-
my God! Now you're sounding
Well,
like the
7
Greens.
members.
Well,
You
no,
know,
hang
next
on.
you'll be telling me there was a swing towards the Greens in the last election, which there wasn't.
All
I'm
right.
not telling you that. No. Beach can't just not let me have my say.
Well,
The Greens got 10% in Franklin with a candidate that wasn't even eligible, right?
true. Yeah.
And then on top of that, Peter George got 23.
Yeah.
Those votes replicated in a
Absolutely.
state election, then they get 2 anti-salmon.
I don't dispute, right?
Like
These
you do endorse salmon Tasmania, like
Yeah.
So you got a job to do, and I respect that.
But yes, I do, and
But if
I'm
you
happy
think that
to-
Julie Collins winning Franklin takes away all your problems when it comes to...
No, what I'm saying, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is my sense of the vote is in electorates such as Franklin, the inner urban seats are very much moving to the left. Across Australia, we've seen this trend where, there isn't, the Liberals are no longer the voice of inner city or even middle city. And so Franklin is a good reflection of that national trend. And so what you're seeing is Labor move more into the centre, push the Liberals out to the right, and then the Greens are moving in on the left and becoming the force. If you look at the vote in Brisbane, the seat of Brisbane, for example, I think it's 30-30-30, right? Okay, on in terms of Greens, Labor and Liberals. So you're seeing, what I'm saying is you're seeing this environmental movement swell in its support. So the result for me in an electorate where really there wasn't a Liberal candidate that really had much of a profile, you are going to get a strong Green or environmentalist.
Although I wouldn't
vote.
really think you could say Franklin is an inner city or even middle ring seat. It's pretty rural, although I acknowledge it's a strange electorate.
It's very middle class. In a lot
Well,
of
it
ways,
is.
isn't
It's very middle Tasmania in my view. Anyhow,
All right. Let me just
Yeah, okay.
sit in the barbed wire fence in the middle here.
That's my role, Brad. Usually.
Yeah, I know. Mr. George could not have had better conditions to run his anti-salmon campaign. There was
Agreed.
salmon globules washing up on the beach.
Yep.
There was
Fillets.
there was deformed fish. Everything was running in his direction for his campaign, and I think he maximised that to get the vote he got. And I totally accept your point, Alex, that there is certainly a large section of the community in Franklin. I suspect it's sort of the southeast part of Franklin and the eastern part, certainly not the southwest part, which love salmon, that are a bit agitated about it. But I do think overall in Tasmania, and we'll come to this, but Anne Urquhart getting elected in Braddon on a pro-salmon platform, as we've discussed, and then I think Jackie Lambie tanking. I'm sure that there's a lot of factors for that we'll get to, but again, she was very, very strongly anti-salmon, and her vote has tanked, particularly in Braddon, looking at some of the boos there. So I think, you can look at it whichever way you like, but overall, I think it'd be fair to say at a statewide level, if you're a politician and you're pro-salmon, you're probably in the right space.
I don't think salmon is such a big issue in other electorates. I think Anne Urquhart did well because she used salmon to show she was pro-region, pro-jobs. I actually don't think people give that much of a stuff about salmon from a voting point of view.
It's a proxy.
In Braddon and Bass.
But they do in Franklin.
Okay.
I think a portion definitely does. You can't deny that.
Moving on.
Portion.
Moving on.
I'm not saying all of them.
sorry,
I'm saying
all
a
right.
portion.
Okay, I'm getting if it was the Academy Awards, the stick would be coming to pull me off stage. All right, let's just talk a little bit about the Senate.
Hang on, Clark.
Clark.
Done.
Well,
Andrew won. Okay.
Andrew won. Yes, there you go.
Nothing changed in Clark. I mean, there wasn't big swings.
Well,
Fortress Clark.
Well, except the Mayor of Hobart and the Mayor of Glenorchy ran a press conference to highlight that they had abjectly failed in getting any
Pork
federal-
barreling bad. Where's our pork?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was amazing. Anyhow, all right, Senate. So look, I think at one stage there we were saying that Richard Colbeck's just about cooked, but from what I can gather, he's picked up over the last few days.
Yeah, I mean, what I understand, and you guys may have different information, but Colbeck's vote, the Liberal Senate vote, has improved on counting over the last couple of days, and he's in a much stronger position than he was a couple of days ago. Lambie,
Don't call it a callback.
That's right. Lambie, her vote is down. Not massively, but enough to be a problem for her. And it's particularly down in the northwest, from what I can see. And again, as I said, she ran on anti-salmon. She had state brand damage, I think it'd be fair to say. And she was barely seen in the state in the campaign. I think all those factors hurt her vote. And from what I can gather, the other factor I understand. Well, I know that One Nation did actually recommend preference to the Liberals on their how to vote cards.
Yep.
This time, I think for the first time ever, they actually had a lot of people on booths in the 3 northern seats handing out for them. So I think we'll find a stronger flow of preferences to the Liberals from One Nation than we would have otherwise expected in other years. No massive push for people to vote below the line this year either in the Senate. There was no Erica Betts to put last or Lisa Singh to vote for or whatever below the line. So everything seems, at this point, the feeling is that we might get 3 Labors. Don't even know who the third one is, someone can tell me. 2 Liberals, which would be Chandler and Colbeck and Nick McKim, and it could be Tatars to Jackie Lambie.
Well, if that was the result, I would feel old and young at the same time, because it would mean Richard Colbeck stays in, and I was at Don College with his son, and if the Labor candidate Bailey Falls gets in, I was at Don College with her mother.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether I'm, am I hip or am I past it? I'm not sure.
You're definitely from the northwest coast.
But it does highlight that Labor picked a young candidate, and I don't think they thought there was a chance to get 3 seats, and it may well happen. And I'm like, good on her, and she'll, obviously.
So who is this? Does anyone know her?
Bailey Falls. I think she's worked for state Labor.
Bailey Falls previously worked, I think, for Josh Willey, and currently, or until the election, worked for Anne Urquhart.
Right. Put her on the ticket. Imagine there'd be some people in Labor who'd been fighting for a Senate seat all their life, and then is she 21? 20?
Well, that's
She's
Something
young.
like that.
that's
Comes along and grabs the seat. I'm not sure that's going to be the way it falls out. I think Jackie Lambie could still win from here. I will say that Colbeck and Lambie will get the last 2. We'll see if I'm right.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go. I mean, it's further proof you've got to be in it to win it sometimes. If you put your name on the ticket, you never know where you'll end up. I think Steve Bradbury is probably the best example of that, or the anyhow. Right, so the other thing we've got to contemplate here is, just before we move on to the state, is this issue of Anne Urquhart's seat. Now, I note that Jack's feverishly pulling out his notes. I've pulled out my little bit of paper, and I don't know where...
Is there a vacant Senate seat?
I don't know. Is there? Your phone's going flat there, Jack. It's fairly early in the day for it to be going, Jack. Look, Jack, you're...
So just to be clear, Anne resigned from the Senate
Yep.
to contest Brad, and she's won, so doesn't need a Senate seat back. Rebecca was promised it, but she's won as well, so she doesn't need it. And so there's 3 years a free 3-year seat up for grabs for whoever can
Basically,
convince 5
yes.
Labor members to back him in. Is that the way it works?
Yeah, well, I don't know about the convince 5 Labor members, but yes, there's a half Senate. There's a Senate vacancy, and there's a nomination up for grabs. The other wild card I'll throw in just before Jack gives us his wisdom is because Anne is a Northwest Coast based member for Braddon, and because there may well be a third seat at state level in the Senate, which is probably Northwest Coast as well, then it actually throws open the door as to where this Senate spot was located. So for a while there, it was like, it's on the Northwest Coast. Who wants to live there? But now
Hey.
I think, I know.
Do you live
Don't
there?
get me wrong. I
would. I go there a lot.
Would
born
you? Are you putting your hand
That's
up
where
for
my
Senate?
member lives.
Yeah,
It's a
okay.
terrific part of the world.
Okay, well, look, I love
Oh, no, I don't think I'm.
You're not in the running? Yeah.
Jack's unlikely, you know.
I
am
look,
no chance.
Yeah,
Dead,
no,
buried,
you've got
and
it, you've
cremated.
got- You've got section...
just before people start, section 44 of the Constitution prohibits me from...
Is that about being too handsome?
It's exactly that. It's the handsome amendment, yes.
All right. Well, Jack, let it. Given your phones have been running hot, let her rip. Tell us
Yeah.
what's your thoughts.
Look, I don't think too many people expected that there would be necessarily a Senate vacancy coming up after this campaign, and it's absolutely wonderful that there is. There are, I understand, a few people who are interested in the role, as you would expect. These seats don't come up very often in Tasmania or anywhere. And there are people who have been around for a little while, and there haven't been a whole lot of opportunities in Labor in a little while. So it's great that there's some candidates that are interested. In terms of timeline, my understanding is that there's a desire, obviously, to get this sorted pretty soon. We don't want to be a seat down in Parliament when it resumes. However, the Prime Minister is also sorting out Cabinet right now, and I think that there's a caucus meeting maybe later in the week.
Friday.
Yeah, that's right. So I would expect Cabinet to be announced on Friday.
Yep.
And then I would expect a Senator to be kind of announced pretty soon after that, would be my guess.
Sorry to interject there. I'm flabbergasted that the Liberal Premier is openly suggesting that Rebecca White should become a minister.
Isn't his logic that more Tasmanians in positions of power is a good thing?
Why isn't he backing in Anne Urquhart? If that's the case.
Yeah, it's a good point.
It's like, why would not say we need 2 ministers from Tasmania? That'd be okay.
Yeah.
But to personally back Beck, I just find that...
Yeah, and fought the good fight for the salmon industry on the Northwest Coast. Anyhow, there you go. All
Sorry.
right.
Give us some names, Jack. Come on.
Come on, Jack.
Look, I'm not gonna give you any names.
I am.
Okay, Becher, go for it.
What do you got, Beach?
Okay, so look, I've got a few names here that have been floating around, we'll
Come
see. Okay, so the former State Secretary Stuart Benson.
My lawyer said I can't talk about Stuart on the Foncast anymore.
Well, Stuart's a loyal servant of the party, from what I can see. I'm very good at losing elections.
I'm still waiting for him to call me back from 2022. So.
That's you as well.
Here you go. Well, I saw Stuart last week. He's looking.
He's a nice guy.
He's looking very buoyant. So for what it's worth.
Where's he now?
Pardon?
Is he working for Dean?
Well, he was with Dean, but I think he was involved pretty strongly with Beck's campaign, wasn't he? Is that me?
That's my understanding.
that's
he
my
was certainly
understanding.
pictured to be
Pictured,
doing that.
yes,
Yeah.
he definitely got him. In terms of photo bombing, Stuart's been good at it lately. Head of Unions Taz, Jess Monday.
That would be my vote.
There you go.
I mean,
Jess would
wouldn't
be very
a nice balance with the dry Richard Dowling joining? You know,
it'd certainly be.
You balance his sort of drier economic view of the world with very pro-worker view.
Wouldn't that be an interesting conversation up the pointy end of the plane on the way to Canberra? You know, Richard and Jess sitting there having
I think it'd be a robust exchange of ideas.
Yeah.
That would be
Can we
good.
just to be clear, the candidates are the former State Secretary and a unionist. Like,
Head of Unions
knock me
Taz.
down with a feather.
Yeah, no. One more.
This is the what we're saying. This is the Labor new generation stuff. This is great so far.
Yep. Young and female from the wasn't that? That
Who's the third one?
That was like the last time we were talking about it. And the third one's Ben Dudman. There you go.
Who came second to Casey Farrell in the
Yeah.
Lions recount?
Yep.
Meander Valley Councillor.
Yeah,
is that
Meander
right?
Valley
That's
Councillor. So there,
Just for me, thanks.
Yeah.
those
Okay.
three.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, look, opportunity to have a performer in the team in Canberra with some leadership experience, policy experience. I'll leave it to National
Leadership
Executive
and
to
policy.
decide.
Okay, all right. Well, there's a glowing endorsement of Jess Monday from Jack. All right.
Well, I'm not going to kiss of death, but
And just to be fair to Jess, she makes fun of me if I've ever flown at the pointy end of the plane, so I don't think she'll be sitting at the pointy end of the plane.
come on, she's going to be a senator.
I think you'll find when you're in the Senate, you're not allowed to fly down the back. It could be dangerous. Anyhow.
Beach, just one more thing I want to add just before we do move on to state, and I know it's dragging on a bit.
Yeah,
but just one other observation I would make about the federal campaign, and perhaps it might cause some controversy in some circles, but there's been a lot of talk about the work from home policy and how the work from home policy was damaging or very damaging, depending on where the spin's coming from, to the coalition campaign. Now, in my view, and this is a slightly informed view, the policy was certainly unpopular in some circles. I think it was less unpopular than people spun. But what was really damaging for the opposition leader was dumping the policy in the middle of the campaign, because what that did, his main equity was people didn't really like the nuclear policy, but he stood for it. He was strong. He was prepared to push through on it.
Yep.
And when he got a little bit of pressure on this work from home policy, he folded like a cheap sack of cards, and people were like, well, if you can't even stand up for your own policies, mate. And I think that was number one rule of campaigns. You've got a bad policy, you don't dump it. You shove it under the cushions and don't talk about it, but you don't dump it.
Yeah.
Rule number 1G, I think that one is. Boys, I'm going to run. Question time beckons, so I'll leave you to bring this ship home. Conveniently, don't have to talk about the stadium. But that's okay. Anyway, I heard the South Australian Premier saw a very impressive hole-in-one a couple of days ago, so I'm sure that little thing will come up. Not the hole-in-one.
That was your hole-in-one.
I took the opportunity to show a fellow golfer a good shot.
When did you show him this?
Well, there was that trip to Adelaide. I didn't make any secret of the fact I was in Adelaide. I was going over paid my own way, and
good on
just
you,
went
AJ.
over to check out things.
Check out stadiums.
I'll leave you to it. Brad, who should lead, before I go, I know this is selfish in the middle of a podcast, who should lead the Liberal Party?
Well, my personal view, obviously I don't have a vote, is it should be Dan Tehan.
Okay, very good. Yep. Talk about kiss of death there, Jack. Good luck to Dan. See you all soon.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, AJ. All right, well, we mentioned the stadium earlier. It's still the number one issue dominating state politics. On Monday, Minister Erica Betts revealed the government had abandoned the promised PPP model for funding the stadium, and we're now going for a debt fund of significant portion of the stadium. What's the where does this
put?
The
script says you ask Alex to put his best news reader hat on, but he's gone.
And tell us,
you have to ask Jack.
Not one red cent more. $375 million promise. What do you make of it, Jack?
Well, I mean, look at that. A little bit more debt for the state to take on for these competent economic managers.
Yep.
Look, I think, to not flog a dead horse here, this is yet another opportunity for the Labor Party to reevaluate its relationship with the stadium policy. This is an opportunity to say, hey, this is not what we signed on to. We didn't sign on to a stadium at any cost. So, I'll just say that, and that's a view I've expressed internally as well.
I think we're on a unity ticket with that point, for what it's worth, Jack.
So look, I mean, this is a huge opportunity for anyone who wants to be anti-stadium right now. We'll see if someone takes that.
Well, I mean, I know, Brad, you've got a few things to say. I think it's almost a kiss of death.
I was very surprised to see the news made public the day before Parliament went back. Let's put it that way. It seems like a very, very odd strategy, tactic, whatever you want to call it.
I think you're working on the assumption there was some strategy there.
I was more surprised, to be frank, not surprised, disappointed, to see Josh Willie get up in one sentence and say, we're going to hold the government to account for this outrageous broken promise, and then 5 seconds, next minute, but we're going to keep on backing him. Like, you can't hold him to account if you're supporting him. I
don't understand it, I've got to say. I think, and that's why I say we're all on a unity ticket on this one. I think, frankly, if the legislation fails, right, and people will inevitably say, if AJ was here and he wasn't doing what he does now, he'd probably be saying, "Oh, but Becher, doesn't that mean the Premier's got to resign if his legislation fails and the stadium falls over?"
And there was a question from Labor about that in Parliament yesterday,
Yeah,
which
well-
is, well, I know you've got a view on that, but does suggest to me that perhaps there is a little bit of internal realignment going on. The fact that that question was even asked.
Well, but at this point, if the Premier had to resign, the Labor leader would have to go with him because they're both in the same boat. They're both
good point.
100% so backed in on it.
The other thing that I don't know that is getting a lot of attention is that if the enabling legislation fails, the POS is still in effect.
Correct.
The POS has to be overturned by the Parliament. So there's a huge incentive. I don't see any reason why the independents in the upper house wouldn't just say, nah, we'll just stick with the POS.
We'll just stick with the...
And presumably, well, I mean, I suppose presumably the government could direct Mac Point to stop cooperating and stop providing, I don't know.
And then they wouldn't build the stadium, I suppose.
But then they wouldn't get the stadium.
Well, but isn't Mac Point taking... TPC to court?
I don't know.
You know, like
Does this just feel like it's a death spiral at this point?
Well, as I said, kiss of death. It's just looking like a complete shit show, top to bottom.
Well, and they're also talking about selling off public land now to help kind of, the deal with the feds, the Fed money was that there were going to be these other things that would happen around the precinct. Oh. And the money wasn't just for the stadium. And now they're talking about selling off Regatta Point.
So you don't think we can have everything? We can sell off land, we can have housing next to the stadium, and we can have a stadium, and we can have a roof that's not a roof that is a roof.
Yeah, for $750 million.
For $750 so it's going well. All right, well, moving on from that fascinating topic, which will no doubt dominate Foncast for a while to come, and it's interesting, we've only mentioned the Spirits, I think, once or twice, so I'll mention Spirits again just for the sake of it. New Ashley.
Yeah, look, Becher, obviously we're really running over time, so a few quick things to wind up. I think it's just worth remarking or noting that the government yesterday, Monday, announced fast-track legislation so they can build a new Ashley in Pontville by 2028. That's 3 years away. That's fast-track.
Yeah. When did they start talking about
We're getting
this?
a bit of a pattern here of government's own planning laws are so bad they have to ram everything through the Parliament.
Yep. And
so that's what it is. I just asked the question, why are we closing Ashley to build what, as I understand it, is essentially a new Ashley?
Just near the very old Ashley.
Well, with not a lot of changes in terms of the way it built or operates, slightly more modern and whatnot, but essentially still is a prison for young people, as I understand it. And why are we spending $150 million to do that? I'm perplexed and bemused. Maybe the Minister, Roger Yench, can explain it to me. But as I understand it, even this site's got some issues. There's a nearby medicinal cannabis farm nearby.
Featured on the ABC, I think.
Which I understand disposes of its excess refuse outside a regular bonfire. So there's
half your luck.
That
might
down, and this new site's downwind. Yep.
There's a nearby gun club who fire guns, and there's concerns about what that might do. There's a nearby whiskey distillery, I think. I mean, it just...
Wow.
I mean...
Well, the kids are not going to break out and get into the whiskey distillery. What's that about?
Well, when I worked for The Advocate, Sean Ford and I pretty well wrote the front page of The Advocate, I think every week, because Ashley didn't have a fence around it. And so people would leave their cars nearby and these kids would come
I'm just, I think the reason we're doing this is because the Premier promised to adopt all 181 recommendations of the Royal Commission before they came out. This is one of them. Now we're literally paying the $150 million price. We've had issues with crime in the northern suburbs, although apparently the local mayor can't see it. I live in the northern suburbs, so I can tell you it's real. We're still talking about raising the age of criminal responsibility to 14. Other states are going the other way. I'm just wondering whether the Minister, Mr. Yench, is in touch with the local community on this one.
Well, yeah. Right, couple of quick ones, quick zingers perhaps. Dean Winter's 3 log cabin stories.
Yeah, it's been reported today.
Yep.
We all got a log cabin story, Beach. You grew up as a baby laird or whatever it was in Ireland.
Well,
Jack's, I don't know, a Mountie from Canada or
I'm
something.
from Newcastle, mate.
no, Canadian kilted yaksman. Yeah.
Obviously, I grew up on a rocky outcrop on King Island.
Yep.
Having three of them is a bit of a feat, as was exposed yesterday by the Premier, I think. In fact, when Mr. Winter came in here for his interview, was it last year? I think he did tell us that he was born and grew up on the West Coast. When checked the transcript,
West Coast boy. Yep.
But yeah, for those that aren't paying attention, apparently he's also in previous political incarnations. He variously said he was born and grew up in Hobart, Kingston.
Yeah. Kingston Beach.
Kingston Beach. So it's got to be a little careful with these things in politics, don't you?
Yeah. All right. And really, finally, Brad, I think the last zinger of the zing, which is quite a zinger.
I know people have been hanging on for having an exclusive, a good one, although your names weren't bad for the Labor Senate.
Yeah,
but,
thank you. Thank you. Mine, not Jack's. No,
Jack didn't put any on the table. So my understanding is, and this is an exclusive, Sam, that there is some people within the Liberal government here who are promoting, I would call a madcap scheme to improve their numbers in the upper house, presumably thinking to do this ahead of any sort of vote on the stadium, whereby long-serving independent member of the upper house, Tanya Rattray, would become the leader of government in the upper house, replacing Leonie Hiskett, who's retiring, and therefore, by doing that, would of course be bound to support government legislation, therefore giving the government an additional vote on the floor in the upper house. Now, personally, I won't forget, and I don't think many people in Scottsdale and North East will forget, that Ms Rattray voted in favour of the Labor Green Forest deal many, many years ago, which ultimately put 10,000 people out of work around the state. First point. And secondly, I hold a very strong view, and I know a lot of party people do, that if you want to be the leader of the government in the upper house, you join the party.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's currently what's being contemplated. But my very strong view is, you want to join the team, you've got to actually join the team. You can't have your cake and eat it too, even in the Legco.
Well, and they've already got a couple of Liberal Party members up there as well.
That's right. I mean, I think Kerry Vincent would make an excellent leader of the upper house.
That's exactly right.
How can you be leader of the government if you're not in the government?
It has happened in the past, I think Beach should recall, but that was before it was really political up there.
Well, I'm going back to the days of Fletch.
Please explain.
Tony Fletcher. So Tony Fletcher was a member for Murchison, previous to Ruth Forrest. A wily old wizard of a man, I've got to say.
You have a staff?
Pardon?
You have a staff and a hat?
Well, he had eyebrows that made John Howard's eyebrows look short. Fletcher's passed away only last year or two, but he was a fascinating man. Used language from a century that I'd never heard. But anyhow, what I'm getting at was he was leader for government in the Legislative Council. I think at a time when there were no members of the Liberal Party elected. I think Peter McKay joined the Liberal Party, became a minister, and Fletch still remained as leader for the government. But the government were very smart at the time, having Fletch as their leader, I've got to say, because Fletch definitely brought with him what I would call a lot of auctoritas. Members would sort of go, well, Fletch says it's a good idea, we better do it. So he was a good leader for government. But that was predated this sort of politicisation. I mean, you've got to remember in the chamber at the moment, Craig Farrell is the president. He's a member of the Labor Party, so that the whole world's changed. But, it would strike me as a bit out of character if that occurred.
Madcap.
There you go. Well, on that bombshell, I think we'll call it a day. Foncast is brought to you by Enterprise Marketing and Research Services, Tasmania's leading and trusted research provider.
And accurate,
particularly during election campaigns. Thank you, Brad.
Great to be on the show.
Thank you, Jack.
Always fun. Thank you.
Yeah, it was good. And even though he's not here, thank you, Alex. Go well, brother. Don't forget, you can catch us up on the YouTube channel Foncast. Foncast is produced and directed by Sam Eichen for Eichen Media. Sam? There he is in a suit today.
Looking resplendent.
And looking glorious, I've got to say. And until next time, carry on.